The words came out like broken glass, cutting through the MasterChef kitchen's competitive energy and leaving everyone bleeding. My mother abandoned our family because of me. David Martinez stood at Station 6, his broad shoulders shaking as 8 months of suppressed guilt finally erupted in front of 15 cameras and a studio audience that had no idea they were about to witness the most devastating confession in cooking competition history. When he looked up at Gordon Ramsay, with eyes that held the weight of a family's destruction, the entire kitchen fell silent, and what had been a cooking challenge became something far more profound, a young man's desperate attempt to understand how his choices had torn apart everyone he loved. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer about culinary competition. This was about a 25-year-old chef who had been cooking with the taste of abandonment in his mouth for 3 years, convinced that every dish he created was seasoned with the salt of his family's tears. And what happened when that guilt finally broke him in front of millions of viewers? It started as the most intense elimination challenge of the season. 8 contestants remained after weeks of grueling tests, each one a legitimate threat to take the title. The MasterChef kitchen blazed under studio lights, every surface gleaming with the kind of perfection that made great television. Gordon Ramsay commanded the space like a culinary emperor, his white chef's coat pristine, his energy crackling with the intensity that had made him legendary. "Tonight," Gordon announced, his voice cutting through the kitchen's electric tension, "is a pressure test that will eliminate 3 of you. You have 90 minutes to create a dish that proves you belong in this competition. This is cooking for your life. 3 eliminations, 1 challenge, 8 chefs fighting for 5 spots in the next round." David Martinez stood at Station 6, his chef's whites crisp and professional, his dark hair neatly styled, his hands steady on the stainless steel counter. At 25, he looked like he had everything together: confident posture, focused expression, the kind of presence that suggested he belonged in this kitchen. But appearances were deceiving, because while his fellow contestants saw opportunity and advancement, David saw something else entirely: another chance to prove that he could succeed where it mattered, even though he'd failed catastrophically where it mattered most. What the cameras didn't capture, what the producers didn't know, what even the show's psychological evaluators had missed during casting, was that David had been carrying the weight of his family's destruction for 3 years. Every technique he'd mastered, every dish he'd perfected, every moment of success in this competition had been tainted by one inescapable truth. His mother was gone, his family was shattered, and David believed it was entirely his fault. "Your challenge tonight," Gordon continued, "is to create a restaurant-quality dish that showcases your technical skills under extreme pressure. You'll be cooking for our panel of guest judges, 3 Michelin-starred chefs who expect perfection." David tried to focus on Gordon's words, but his mind kept drifting to a kitchen 3,000 miles away, in the small house in Phoenix where his family used to gather for Sunday dinners, where his mother, Maria Martinez, would spend hours preparing traditional Mexican dishes while David, his younger brother Carlos, and their father watched soccer on the old television. That kitchen had been the heart of their home for 23 years, until David's choices turned it into a war zone. "You may choose your proteins and begin cooking," Gordon announced. "Your time starts now." The elimination challenge began, and 7 contestants sprinted toward the pantry with clear strategies and focused determination. David walked slowly, his mind still trapped in memories of the last conversation he'd had with his mother. "You're destroying this family, David," she'd said, her voice breaking with exhaustion and heartbreak. "I can't watch you tear us apart anymore." That was 3 years ago. He hadn't spoken to her since. David selected his ingredients mechanically: lamb chops, root vegetables, fresh herbs, the makings of a dish he'd perfected in culinary school before everything went wrong. But as he returned to his station and began his mise en place, the familiar routine felt hollow. Around him, the other contestants were executing with confidence. Sarah was breaking down her whole fish with surgical precision. Marcus was building a complex sauce that required perfect timing. The energy was competitive, Focused, electric. David's energy was different. Every cut of his knife, every adjustment of seasoning, every technique he employed was a reminder of the path that had led him here, a path paved with family arguments, broken promises, and choices that had cost him everything that mattered. 40 minutes into the challenge, David was technically executing well, but something was wrong. His lamb was perfectly seared. His vegetables were cut with professional precision, but his movements lacked the passion and purpose that had carried him through weeks of competition. "David," Gordon called out during one of his rounds, "show me what you're working on." David looked up at Gordon, and for a moment, the weight of everything he'd been carrying threatened to overwhelm him. Herb-crusted lamb with roasted root vegetables and red wine reduction, chef. Gordon tasted the developing sauce, his expression thoughtful. "The technique is sound, but something's missing. Where is your heart in this dish?" David's heart. That was exactly the problem. His heart had been broken 3 years ago, when his mother walked out of their house with 2 suitcases and never looked back. When his father started drinking heavily to cope with the abandonment. When his brother Carlos stopped speaking to him because he blamed David for destroying their family. "Just concentrating, chef," David managed to say. Gordon studied David's face for a moment, his experienced eye catching something troubling in the young man's expression. But the clock was ticking, and there were 7 other contestants to monitor. As the challenge entered its final 30 minutes, David's technical execution remained flawless. But emotionally, he was falling apart. Every herb he chopped reminded him of helping his mother in their family kitchen. Every adjustment he made to his sauce brought back memories of Sunday dinners, when they'd all been together, when he'd been a son instead of the reason his family no longer existed. 20 minutes remaining. David tried to plate his lamb, but his hands were beginning to shake. Not from culinary pressure. He'd handled that for weeks. This was something deeper, something that had been building since the moment he'd walked into this kitchen and realized that success here couldn't erase failure at home. That's when he heard a conversation between 2 other contestants that shattered his composure completely. "My mom's going to be so proud when she sees this episode," Sarah was saying to Marcus as they worked on their final plating. "Same here," Marcus replied. "My whole family's having a watch party. They've been my biggest supporters through this whole journey. Family support, proud mothers, watch parties filled with love and encouragement." David's knife clattered to his cutting board as the contrast hit him like a physical blow. While his fellow contestants had families cheering them on, David had a mother who had disappeared from his life, a father who blamed him for everything that went wrong, and a brother who refused to return his calls. He tried to continue plating, but the shaking in his hands was getting worse. His perfectly cooked lamb was sliding off the spoon. His sauce was splattering across the plate instead of drizzling elegantly. 10 minutes remaining. David looked around the kitchen at 7 contestants, putting finishing touches on dishes that would make their families proud, while he struggled with a plate that represented nothing except his own isolation. That's when the panic attack started. It began as tightness in his chest, spreading outward until he couldn't breathe properly. The sounds of the kitchen, knives hitting boards, pans clattering, timers beeping, became overwhelming white noise. David gripped the edge of his station, trying to ground himself, but all he could see was his mother's face the last night they'd spoken, the way her eyes had filled with tears as she told him she couldn't watch him destroy their family anymore. The way she'd looked at him like he was a stranger, like the son she'd raised had been replaced by someone she didn't recognize. 5 minutes. Start thinking about final presentation. David tried to finish plating, but he couldn't focus. His hands were shaking so badly that he knocked over his sauce pot, sending red wine reductions spattering across his station like blood. As he scrambled to clean up the mess, trying to salvage something presentable from the disaster, the weight of 3 years of guilt and self-blame finally crushed him completely. David dropped his towel and began sobbing, not the quiet tears of culinary pressure, but the kind of sobs that come from the deepest places of shame and abandonment. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to muffle the sounds, but grief that deep can't be contained. Time. Hands up. Step back. But David couldn't step back. He stood at his station, staring down at a ruined plate that perfectly represented his ruined family, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except cry over the mess he'd made of everything. The other contestants began to notice the breakdown at Station 6. The kitchen, which moments before had been buzzing with post-challenge energy, started to quiet as attention focused on David's obvious distress. Gordon, who had been preparing to begin the judging, immediately noticed the change in atmosphere and walked quickly toward David's station. "David," Gordon called out, his voice gentle but urgent. "What's happening here?" David tried to answer, tried to pull himself together, but the words wouldn't come. He just stood there, crying over a plate of lamb that had cost him everything and gained him nothing. "David, look at me," Gordon said, approaching the station. "Talk to me. What's going on?" That's when David looked up at Gordon with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young and spoke the words that would stop the competition and change everything. "My mother abandoned our family because of me." The kitchen fell completely silent. 7 contestants stopped their post-challenge discussions. Camera operators seemed stunned into stillness. Even the background noise of kitchen equipment seemed to fade away. Gordon's expression shifted from confusion to deep concern as he processed what he'd just heard. "What do you mean your mother abandoned your family?" Gordon asked carefully, moving closer to David's station. David's response came out in a rush, like a confession that had been building pressure for 3 years. "I was a nightmare as a teenager," David said, his voice breaking with each word. "Drugs, arrests, stealing money from my parents to buy more drugs. I put my family through hell for 5 years." Gordon stood completely still, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. "My mother tried everything," David continued, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. "Rehab programs, therapy, interventions. She spent their retirement savings trying to save me. She worked double shifts to pay for treatment centers that I would just run away from." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Everyone, contestants, crew, judges, was beginning to understand the weight of what David had been carrying. "She finally told me that she couldn't watch me destroy our family anymore," David whispered. "She said she was choosing to save my father and my brother Carlos from the chaos I brought into their lives. She packed 2 suitcases and left. That was 3 years ago. I haven't seen her since." David collapsed onto his knees beside his station, overwhelmed by guilt that had been consuming him from the inside for years. "My father started drinking heavily after she left. My brother Carlos won't speak to me because he blames me for breaking up our family. And they're right. I destroyed everything. I made my own mother choose between me and the rest of her family, and she chose them." Gordon stared down at this 25-year-old man who had been competing at the highest level while carrying a burden that would crush most people, and made a decision that would define his legacy as more than just a chef. Behind the scenes, Gordon did something unprecedented in elimination challenge history. "Stop the cameras," Gordon said quietly but firmly. "Right now, Gordon, we're in the middle of judging." A producer started. "I said stop the cameras," Gordon repeated, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This young man is in crisis, and he needs help, not an audience." The MasterChef kitchen went dark. For 25 minutes, what happened in that kitchen existed outside of television, outside of production, outside of everything except human compassion, responding to human pain. When the cameras came back on, Gordon was sitting on the floor beside David, and something fundamental had changed in the kitchen's atmosphere. "David," Gordon said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You did not destroy your family." David looked up at him through his tears. "But if I hadn't been such a disaster—" "Stop," Gordon interrupted gently. "Addiction is a disease, not a character flaw. You were a sick teenager who needed help, not judgment." Gordon helped David to his feet and continued speaking, not just to him, but to everyone in the kitchen. "Your mother made an impossible choice that no parent should ever have to make," he said. "She was trying to protect your father and brother from the chaos of addiction. That doesn't mean she stopped loving you. It means she was drowning and had to choose who to save." David was still crying, but he was listening. "But I put her in that position," David protested. "No," Gordon said firmly. "Addiction put her in that position. The disease put her in that position. The fact that our society doesn't provide adequate support for families dealing with addiction put her in that position. You were a sick kid who needed help. Gordon turned to address the entire kitchen, including the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is something that happens to families across this country every day. Addiction doesn't just destroy the person using, it destroys everyone who loves them. And families are forced to make impossible choices about how to survive. He looked back at David. Your mother's choice wasn't a rejection of you. It was an attempt to save what was left of your family while you got the help you needed. But Gordon wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. David, when was the last time you tried to contact your mother? About 6 months ago, David whispered. I sent her a letter telling her I was clean, that I was in culinary school, that I was trying to rebuild my life. She never responded. Gordon began typing on his phone. What's her name? Maria Martinez. She lives in Phoenix. And you've been clean for how long? 3 years. The day she left, I realized I had to choose between drugs and having any chance of getting my family back. I chose my family. Gordon continued typing. David, your mother didn't respond to your letter because she's probably terrified of getting her hopes up again. Addiction recovery is full of relapses, and she's probably protecting herself from more heartbreak. Gordon showed David his phone screen. I'm contacting our production team in Phoenix. We're going to invite your mother to the finale as a surprise guest, because someone who has been clean for 3 years and competing at this level deserves the chance to show their family who they've become. David stared at the phone, unable to process what was happening. But what if she says no? David asked. What if she doesn't want to see me? Then we'll deal with that, Gordon said simply. But David, you can't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for choices you made when you were sick. At some point, you have to forgive yourself and give other people the chance to do the same. That's when Gordon did something that had never happened in MasterChef history. The elimination challenge results are postponed, Gordon announced. David Sullivan needs to cook one more dish, but this time he's cooking for his mother. The entire kitchen erupted. Not with competition energy, but with pure emotional support. 7 contestants who had been competing against each other immediately surrounded David, offering encouragement, sharing their own family struggles, creating the kind of support network that transcends competition. But more than that, Gordon continued, David, I want you to understand something. The fact that you've been able to compete at this level while carrying this guilt, the fact that you've stayed clean for 3 years, the fact that you've built a career in spite of everything, that's not the behavior of someone who destroys families. That's the behavior of someone who's fighting to rebuild them. What happened next was unlike anything in cooking competition history. David returned to his station, but he was different now. The guilt was still there, but it was joined by something else, hope. He wasn't cooking to punish himself for his past anymore. He was cooking to honor the family he was trying to rebuild. His second dish was a revelation, traditional, a Mexican comfort food that told the story of Sunday dinners and family kitchens and all the love that had shaped him before addiction nearly destroyed everything. When Gordon tasted it, he closed his eyes for a long moment before speaking. David, he said, this doesn't just taste like food. This tastes like home. This tastes like love. This tastes like a son who's ready to come back to his family. The episode, when it aired, became more than television. It sparked national conversations about addiction, family dynamics, recovery, and the long road back from rock bottom. David's mother, Maria Martinez, did come to the finale. The reunion was emotional, complicated, and real, not the stuff of television drama, but the messy, difficult, beautiful work of rebuilding relationships that have been broken by addiction and time. David didn't win MasterChef that season, but he won something more valuable. The understanding that recovery isn't just about getting clean. It's about learning to forgive yourself and giving others the chance to heal alongside you. Today, David runs a small restaurant in Phoenix called Second Chances, where he hires people in recovery and creates the kind of community that supports healing rather than judgment. His relationship with his family is still a work in progress, but it's progress nonetheless. Above his kitchen hangs a photo from the MasterChef finale, David with his mother, both of them crying, both of them hopeful. Below it, a simple sign: family isn't perfect, love is. Because that's what Gordon Ramsay taught David that night, that the best way to honor the family you've hurt isn't to punish yourself forever, but to become the person they can be proud of, even if it takes time for them to see it. David's mother didn't abandon him because he was unlovable. She left because she was human, and humans sometimes have to make impossible choices to survive. But love, real love, finds a way back. It just takes courage to believe it's possible.